Yep, welcome back. Take a seat. We are going to continue with the second presentation for this evening. So for this presentation, we are going to hear from two union organizers with the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America, or the UE. And the first speaker will be Ben Wilson, and then after Ben, we'll listen to Al Hart. So take it away, Ben.
Hey, sisters and brothers, how are you doing? So I wanted to put us in some historical context in terms of how the original New Deal was achieved for working people, and we should preface that by acknowledging that the implementation of New Deal programs certainly were discriminatory in their nature, but there were major achievements that were won by working people in winning concessions from the rich. And that's essentially what we're trying to do here with trying to win a Green New Deal. And the New Deal was won by millions of workers organizing during the Depression into unions at their workplace. And these workers were led in large part by communists, socialists, and radical trade unionists. And they struck and they engaged in massive direct action. So this is probably best exemplified in 1934 with general strikes in Toledo, Ohio, in Minneapolis, and in San Francisco. And it was this pressure that was able to be applied on capital to win those concessions. And I think in the labor movement, those that are truly concerned and serious about winning a Green New Deal understand that the tool through which we will be able to best use and the most influential tool in order to take on large industries that are themselves very powerful and very organized is the tool of mobilization of workers at their workplace. When workers put pressure directly on production and profit, we know that we are able to influence those that currently are running the society. Those are the wealthy and the elites. So this is going to certainly require more than talking about it. We're going to have to fight through this in order to achieve success. So Al, I think, is going to talk a little bit more about some of the logistics in terms of the implementation of the Green New Deal and how we may see a boon, for instance, within the trade union movement and good-paying union jobs and all the functionality that we all understand to be important, including, of course, the positive benefits on our environment and our ability to sustain as a species. So I'd just like to end with a couple final comments. I think that and Mike and Al and Charlie, I know, have been putting a lot of work in building coalition, trying to build coalition with the existing labor movement and the environmental movement, and that's an ongoing effort. As we know, most establishment unions are either neutral on this issue or are actively opposed to it, and so we should try to bring them in and convince them. But much like the Democratic Party, we're not going to rely on them to do what's right for working people. And so we can try to reform where we can, but I think it's essential for environmentalists and the people that are caring about this to take the lead within the labor movement and really be front runners in revitalizing a weakened labor movement. And so through those efforts, through us joining labor unions that are militant and democratic, we will be in a much better position to take on capital, which is ultimately what this fight is going to require. So I just encourage everyone here. I know that oftentimes after discussion we leave with a lot of inspiration and hope and education, but maybe not so much, what do I do tomorrow? And everyone in this room knows friends, family members, children, grandchildren, grandparents that are working in places that are non-union, and they should be contacting militant, democratic, rank-and-file trade unions like the United Electrical Workers, which is the union that I organize with, that is taking the lead on this so that we can have some power when we're taking on industries like the fossil fuel industry. So after the presentation, I'm going to be distributing union literature, and I'll have that, and I just heed everyone in this room to start thinking like an organizer, because ultimately what they want us to do is just kind of talk about this over and over again, and to maybe have some rallies outside. But what we need to do is we need to start shutting stuff down, and that does require workers being truly organized at their workplace. So thank you.
Next is Al Hart.
Thank you. I'm retired from UE. I was in the union for 44 years in a number of roles. I started out working at the General Electric plant in Erie, Pennsylvania, which nobody can hear me. Can you move that closer? Can you hear me now? In 1973, and that was a gigantic plant then. It was 15,000 workers just in my local union alone, 20,000 people altogether, making a variety of electrical equipment and something that's not all that electrical, locomotives. And a couple of experiences that I had in that local kind of point me, before we knew that there was global warming, before we knew we were in a climate crisis, my first job at GE, I was working in a building that made electrical controls for various kinds of machinery. I wasn't in the transportation part of the plant, but I knew this was the biggest thing we did in this plant was made locomotives, and we made transit cars. We made electric commuter rail cars that were quite extraordinary. But we only did that for 10 years. The company decided to get out of it. But we had over 1,000 people making these wonderful vehicles that, get people out of their cars. And later I lived in Connecticut working for the union, and I used to, on weekends, take the Metro North into New York City, riding a train that we built. It was kind of nice. Those are gone now. The trains they have now are foreign made. No one in this country makes commuter rail cars anymore. No one in this country makes subway cars anymore. This is the insanity of the brown old deal that the labor movement's living with, and most of them seem to be like happy. Let's hang on to all the little scraps of lousy technology and environmentally destructive jobs we still have, rather than look towards the future. So a couple of years after I was just started in the plant, I was 25 years old, I had this idea to write a resolution. I found out we had a convention every year, which I hadn't been to, of the National Union, and we had resolutions. So I wrote a resolution about the railroad industry and why the whole union should promote the rail industry, because we have jobs in it, not only in that plant, but several other plants. And so that became a policy of our union that still is a policy today. We talked about it in terms of the energy crisis, which is something we used to talk about in the 70s, and the environmental crisis, because we already knew that cars polluted. We just didn't know that they're killing the whole planet in a rapid period of time. A couple years later, we had something else that came up. Jimmy Carter, who's a very nice ex-president, but was not such a great president, gave into pressure from the energy industry to deregulate the oil and gas industries. Which basically went on strike to get them to do that. We had an energy shortage, which magically disappeared as soon as they just deregulated oil and natural gas prices. And we were highly upset about this. And we started looking into something that I think many clients sort of mentions, which is, why can't we just take over the utilities here? Which is something that there's lots of precedent for. There's lots of places in this country where the electric utilities and the gas utilities are owned by the public. And so we even brought in speakers from other cities, from Los Angeles and Memphis, from people that ran the utility department. And I started reading about it, and we started trying to build a movement, which didn't succeed, in Erie to municipalize the electric and the gas utilities. And some of what I learned in that period of time is that When you own the utility, you can decide what energy sources you're going to use. And even in the 70s, I was reading stuff in the 70s, these publicly owned electric utilities were doing all sorts of innovative stuff to go to renewables before we even knew how critical it was to do that. So that was an experience that also gave me some idea that, labor ought to take the lead in trying to change this stuff. Sometime before we finish this whole series, I think we should have a session to just discuss what would green jobs look like? What would a green transition look like? Because there's so much that needs to be done. I'm glad that Naomi Klein mentions relocalizing production. I lived through one of the worst transitions in American economic history. I joined the labor movement, and in my lifetime, I saw the manufacturing industrial labor movement decimated. We went through something called deindustrialization. Our jobs left the country, our jobs are destroyed. I was a union organizer through much of the time, seeing plant after plant, negotiating a plant closing agreement, trying to get people some kind of scrap of severance pay. We went through a lot of unjust transitions. So we kind of know in reverse what a just transition might look like. And the idea, a very good idea, which is that the environmental crisis is partly caused by the fact that how many of us in this room are wearing even one item of clothing that was made in North America? Okay, 2 people, yeah. It used to be our clothes were made in the United States or Mexico or Canada, and now they're shipped all over the world, right? My union used to make all kinds of electronic stuff. That's why the word radio is in our name. We don't make radios anymore, but we used to. All that stuff comes from Asia. I'm not saying Asia shouldn't have manufacturing, but why should everything we consume be made on the other side of the world and shipped? What is the impact of that on the carbon footprint? Is my time up? Okay, you're doing all kinds of gyrations over there, so all right, I'll stop. I could go on for hours. Thank you.
So I just want to say, this series does not have to stop on May 31st, right? We can keep going. This is the work of our generation, right? So whether or not it's in this form or not, it's not the end. So I'd like to introduce Guillermo Perez. He's gonna, Guillermo Perez, is that correct?
Guillermo Perez.
Perez. Sorry. So Guillermo is on the National Executive Board of the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement. He's the president of the Pittsburgh chapter.
I am.
And what's that?
I am. Sí,
Yes.
soy el presidente.
He's also on the executive board of Casa San Jose, a nonprofit that welcomes and provides resources for Latino families in Pittsburgh. He's also part of the United Steelworkers Education and Membership Development Department as a labor educator.
Yeah, but we're not here to talk about
Yes.
that.
Okay. He is here with his LACLA hat on.
I am.
All right. Thank you, Guillermo.
All right. Thank you for having me. So Helen asked me to talk a little bit about trying to sort of connect some dots here with respect to the subject at hand and the crisis for immigrant families here in the U.S. and specifically in southwestern Pennsylvania. If you want to sort of find like the 2 most struggling activists, I would say it's the immigrant rights people and the environmentalists in this part of the state. So we should definitely get together because we're fighting the same people. But I do want to say a couple of things. Our LACLA chapter has been around since 2014, and the thing that I'm proudest of in terms of what we've been able to accomplish is something I think I mentioned the last time I was here, and that was using the money that we've raised from unions, for the most part, each year for a celebration that we do for Hispanic Heritage Month. It's called Que Viva Clemente, because Clemente is like the most famous Latino associated with Pittsburgh. As you know, there historically not been a lot of Latinos in Pittsburgh, but it's changing. We're here. Aquí estamos y no nos vamos. And so it was through going to a labor notes conference. There's one coming up. If people haven't gone, you should really go. It's an amazing conference. I met some activists from Western Massachusetts who had created a solidarity fund to help families in crisis. And so we got into discussions with the Pennsylvania Immigration and Citizenship Coalition, PIC, which is a really great statewide organization. And we created this bond fund, El Fondo Solidario de Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Solidarity Fund. And with it, we've been able to get people detained by ICE out of detention and back with their families, at least temporarily. But even so, it's a huge victory to get people out of ICE detention. So I guess the important thing that I would want to emphasize, and I spoke about this before, and it is coming up, on March 5th, we will officially launch our campaign targeting Colcom. And this is the time when we're really going to need environmentalists to be out on the street with immigrant rights activists to call out white supremacy, call out eco-fascism, talk about specifically, maybe even about the fact that climate change is causing people to migrate. Are we going to punish them for that? Are we going to allow a foundation to greenwash its reputation by giving money to prominent civic organizations, many environmental organizations? So we're gonna stir some shit up, most definitely. Well, that's what we do. But it's again, I mean, the timing I think is really terrific for this, and I think it's a great opportunity for our two movements to really come together and here locally. The worst, I mean, every week is bad, but the latest thing now is we're going to see ICE officers looking more and more like SS. I mean, they're going to create these paramilitary. They're going to be like SWAT teams, right? They're going to start actually killing people. We've already seen it in other places. People getting shot by ICE agents. ICE are not police officers. They're not law enforcement. They have no business policing our streets. They have no business having weapons and pointing them at anybody. It is not a crime to leave your home to seek out a better life. That's not a crime. That's our story. That's the story of humanity. So anyway, I don't want to get into a lot of details about what exactly is going on. All I can tell you is people are living in a state of terror. People are afraid to go to court, victims of domestic violence are scared to report it. Parents are scared to go to their parent-teacher meetings. Fathers and mothers who get up in the morning to go to work don't know for sure that they'll come back. Do you know what I mean? For a child, what that is to have to think about, that your parents could just disappear one day. And when I say disappear, it's not an exaggeration. They literally disappear. If not for CASA has a rapid response network just to find people, just to find them, because they're not allowed to communicate with anybody once ICE takes them. So this is a great moment for us because we have an opportunity here. Colcom, I think I said this before, but it bears saying again. Colcom is not a foundation, an environmental organization that dabbles in white supremacy. Colcom is a white supremacist organization that uses environmentalism to greenwash their racism, their white supremacy. And we got to call them out. And my real hope is that right here in Pittsburgh, we will take down one of the biggest funders of anti-immigrant white supremacy in the United States. And we could do that here. So, March 5th at 10 o'clock, we launch our campaign. And we're going to give lots of opportunities for people to be involved in that. And I suspect it's going to be, as I said, it's going to be something, because it's going to make a lot of very nice, well-meaning liberal people very uncomfortable. We hope so too, because we do think at the end of the day that the folks who took this money know it was the wrong thing to do. So now they have to stand up and publicly say, not only that they're not going to take any more money, but that it was a mistake to take it in the first place. All right. Muchísimas gracias.
So Guillermo did not use his full time. I want to just take
It's
a little.
unusual for a Latino.
I just want to say that we will be talking. Guillermo's going to stay. We're going to talk about this in the action planning group. If you want to be part of this, if you want to be part of fighting PA House Bill, 1100, as Patty asked us, if you want to stand with the people who are occupying the Cathedral of Learning right now to get them to divest, if you want to help us move into real action, please do stay. Please be part of that.
All right, yes, thank you, Guillermo, and thank you, Helen. Okay, that leaves us with discussion time. As always, yes, please raise your name tag. So, okay.
I had a question. This March 5th at 10 a.m. Where are you meeting? What is it? We'll show up.
Actually, unfortunately, you guys at the UE, you share offices. Colcom's in your building, by the way. Oh, good. We're going to be in front of, it's Gateway Center. Gateway Center at 10 o'clock. We're going to have an event page that we officially will push out, so all of you are going to see it. But it'll be 10 o'clock, Gateway Center, Thursday, March 5th.
This morning's Post-Gazette has a big article about something that was sponsored by Colcom. So talk about, I don't know if you call this greenwashing or not, it's a citizenship event. It's an event at which American immigrants are becoming citizens. And the final paragraph talks about this is sponsored by Colcom. So people have to write letters to the editor to explain why the Colcom is doing this hypocritically, to talk about what Colcom is really doing that's white supremacist.
So this is the Mellon family heiress.
Okay. Oh. Yeah. Open. So Helen's next.
So Guillermo, something that a lot of people don't understand is just how much immigrants contribute in terms of labor to our economy, everything. And if we're going to be going forward with the Green New Deal, one of the proposals is a massive reconstruction effort. And of course, undocumented people who don't have documents have been building our homes, our buildings. They've been laboring in so many different areas, paying taxes and receiving nothing in return but, at this point, terror and quite often vilification and xenophobia. So would you speak a little bit more to that? Especially what you've seen on the local level. I've heard just a few horror stories that you've told that are really powerful illustrations.
Well, it's there are sectors of the economy that are very, very dependent on immigrant labor, including undocumented immigrant labor. The biggest one by far and away is the agricultural sector. There's basically, conservatively, half of all the farm workers in the United States are undocumented, and that's conservative. It's probably more than that. So if all of those people were removed, the whole sector would collapse. As Helen was saying, construction. There's a very sort of bad joke, but it's accurate that if Trump built the wall he originally intended, it's almost for sure that undocumented people would be building it because they are a third of the construction workforce in Texas. States like California or New York, go to New York, what would become of the restaurant industry in New York if all of a sudden all the undocumented disappeared? I mean, it would collapse. The thing that important to understand with respect to immigrant labor, and especially undocumented immigrant labor, is they are a supplement to the native-born workforce that we have. They don't take jobs; they create jobs. Jobs that otherwise, all the people working in the front of the restaurant don't get those jobs if there aren't people working in the back of the restaurant. And so, the fact that those folks are there in the back of the restaurant is what creates and makes those restaurants viable. And the same thing's true of almost every industry or sector of the economy where they are. So basically what we have is a de facto guest worker program, only the guest worker's guest is not what I would describe that relationship. It's absolutely understood. Their labor is needed. They make huge contributions to the economy. For the people in this room, some of whom are now getting Social Security, they're subsidizing our Social Security in the tune of tens of billions of dollars, money that they're almost certainly never gonna see. So, you know, and this raises sort of an interesting question to maybe tackle about this question of growth or not growth. But demographically, we need young working age people in the country so that all the old people will have a decent retirement. And so this is part of what the immigrant population does. They're younger, they participate in the workforce at higher levels, and they have kids and they have families, and you know, they're gonna be a key part of our future as a country, assuming we have a future as a country.
Stacks open. Mike.
I think my brother raised a very important issue, and that's how do we intersect and cross-pollinate with other struggles. And if the Green New Deal and the people that are envisioning and the people that are writing and the people that are constructing on paper and on blueprint the Green New Deal don't understand the need to cross-pollinate with Black Lives Matter, with the immigration movement, with the Me Too movement, with the indigenous movement, and with the many other movements out there, if we don't learn how to cross-pollinate and how to sit down, we will never, ever get the voice, get the political power, and get the whatever we need to overthrow these bastards. And we have a very short time to do it. And I think that this group needs to address the question of how do we do that in Pittsburgh? How do we sit down? I mean, I went to 3 or 4 other major gatherings in the last month, Unite, that Summer Lee started. I don't see hardly any of those people in this room, or vice versa. I belong to an Earth Day coalition that's building a humongous, it has over 40 organizations. Most of the people in this room aren't going to those meetings or aren't part of that process. We have got to figure out how to weave these movements and these organizations together and sit down and work out what we got to work out. Because if we don't, they're going to pick us off one by one, piece by piece, constituency by constituency. And I would like to raise one more time what I raised to Patty. You have frontline communities here in Pittsburgh, especially minority communities that are getting hammered. You had frontline communities out in the rural areas that are dealing with the effects of fracking and the petrochemical industry. But you have frontline communities overseas that no matter how well we do things here, they are getting murdered. You have 6 million Congolese people in the last 20 years who have gotten killed so we could get their resources and minerals for our solar panels. You have 8 million people who have been made refugees in Colombia by forces paid with US dollars so we could get the precious minerals and resources we need. If we don't deal With that question, at the same time, you will never have a Green New Deal that is equitable. You'll never have one that is just, and you'll never have one that succeeds if we don't deal with all of those questions. So my challenge to this group is, how do we here in Pittsburgh figure out the ways and the means with all the constrictions and all the, I mean, I know everybody in here is probably part of 3 or 4 other organizations doing a million different things. We've got to figure out the way to cross-pollinate, to communicate, and sit down and build a political movement in the streets, in our educational centers, in our judicial areas, in our legal and political arenas. And if we don't take all of those on like we're playing a piano, we're never going to come out with any harmony. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to say a little bit more about new deals and new deals and just transitions, which, because I had a very short time up there before. Just transition doesn't just mean we're going to make sure people, white guys that worked in the oil industry or the coal mines and their communities or other industries that are gone under get good jobs, get their needs taken care of. It's got to include people that have been left out of the old economy all along, which mostly means people of color and their communities. These green jobs have to include everybody. Just on a couple of things, because there's been discussion about the New Deal here. The New Deal was an amazing thing, and the best things it did were the result of pressure from below. The reason we got labor rights as a central part of the New Deal in 1935 was that in 1934, there were some of the biggest strikes we've ever seen in American history. The reason we got unemployment compensation as part of the New Deal was because even before Roosevelt was elected, in 1930 and 31 and 32, there was a mass movement of the unemployed in this country. The reason we got Social Security, a lot of people don't know this, there was a mass movement of old people in the 1930s. It was called the Townsend Plan. It was started by a guy named Dr. Francis Townsend, demanding a national pension that would have been much more generous than Social Security. And the idea was, you get this when you turn 60, but you got to stop working, because this is a jobs program too, to open up jobs for younger people. So that agitation by millions of old people, millions of senior citizens, resulted in the fact that we did get Social Security out of this. The other, big transformation that happened at the end of Roosevelt's term, or close to the end, was we converted the whole damn economy of this country to war production, and then we converted it back again, like that, like in months, which was quite amazing, and it shows how fast we can move when we have to. But a couple things about that, a couple of gender and racial equality issues about that. All of a sudden, when all the young men went off to war, this country discovered that women who had been taught, we've been told, people had been socialized for generations that women can't do hard, heavy work. It's beyond their capacity. Suddenly, that all went out the window, and women were building tanks and building bombers and building the weaponry that defeated the Axis powers. Amazingly, right? And then as soon as the war was over, suddenly that was all erased, and they go back to your kitchen, go back to raising babies. You can't do this anymore. So suddenly, very fast, this country got amnesia about women could do. The other thing is, the one moment when the Roosevelt administration really did something for African Americans was when A. Philip Randolph and black leaders, particularly black working class leaders, decided we are not going to put up with this war boom leaving us out. And they announced they were going to march on Washington for racial justice in the war production. Roosevelt got scared, and he agreed, despite the objections of all the Southern Democrats, because the Democratic Party, remember, back then the Democratic Party was the most racist party of the two. But Roosevelt enacted the Fair Employment Practices Commission that said, if you discriminate against black people in your factory, you're not getting any war work. So we can learn a lot from past transitions, and I'm going to stop here, but those are a couple lessons I thought we should remember.
To respond to Mike's call right here now. We do need to connect to other organizations. We need to become more diverse in this room. we need to be participating in and supporting other groups. Part of the intention in inviting Guillermo here is so that we could help support that movement. To having one PA here is to support the environmental justice work that they're doing. And this, in some cases, involves very concrete campaigns. It also involves reaching out and calling in the unions that right now are resisting. So we had already planned in the outreach team to do this, but as we do this, think about groups that you know that you personally can invite to either come to this discussion and be part of it, to be part of our action planning, or to directly support one of the campaigns that we've talked about. So we're gonna go around and I'm gonna ask each of you to name an organization or a group and commit to contacting that group. Let's really start to spread and grow and support each other across this region.
Congress of Neighboring Communities, which are all the municipalities around the edges of Pittsburgh and the city of Pittsburgh. We've been working together to work on recycling, on the opioid crisis, on infrastructure upgrade, but it's municipal officials and it meets in the daytime, but they need to hear a lot of this stuff and need a lot better connections with our Connect, Congress of Neighboring Communities. It's called Connect. But it's elected officials, municipal officials.
Yes, I think having kind of a 1-minute elevator pitch, right, is great. But each of you also knows the particular person or group that you're addressing. So you will need to tailor it to the particular purposes, missions, or needs of that organization in order to call them in. Okay, Terry.
Oh no, I passed the.
Oh, no, nobody needs to pass. Just name a group that you think that you could connect to.
Well, I'm with Granite Residents for Our Future. But they're very aware of,
Oh, sure.
you know, who they are, so, anyway. That was the best I could do.
Thank you.
Business that might be like a place for flyers or something like that.
Okay. People of Capital.
Some of us are here.
Okay, I was just going to say Pittsburgh United, the housing.
Pittsburghers for Public Transit.
They're going to be presenting here, so they're already part of it. You got to take somebody else.
Come back to me. Oh, Bend the Arc, Pittsburgh.
Joe?
I guess the Pittsburgh Friends meeting.
Working Group Against Racism. It's part of the Friends meeting. Just WGAR is good. WGAR. Mm-hmm.
The Black Urban Gardeners and the Black Environmental Activists.
They are also part here connected with them.
The National Council on Jewish Women, Pittsburgh chapter.
I don't know if other folks.
Who here has a piece of paper? Okay. Who has a notebook? All right. Are you willing to sacrifice some paper? Of course. All right. Everybody? Please pass it down. Instead of me writing all these things, which is going to take a long time, right? Yeah. Let's pass out a piece of paper and just write one down and pass it in to close out our 7 o'clock session. And then give a little more food. wants to take part in the action planning and logistics planning, which is about childcare, transportation. So the video, I'm actually going to let you make that call. Oh. So this is being recorded, and this video is going to be going up on our website, and it's on Facebook. We're going to ask that you also share that video out.
Thank you, Dean.
I just want to clarify about sending action items out. Are we okay about the emails that we've submitted sending out action items, or how best to do that?
So one of the questions that has just been raised is, how do we inform this larger group? There's now over 160 people within this group. Over 160 people have attended at one point or another, or have committed to being part of it as speakers, organizations, and so on. So everyone here, you are very welcome right now to make any major announcements. One of the things that our action group can do is decide how we are going to inform those people of actions that are coming up. And there are different ways we could do that, right? We could decide on priorities. We could invite people to send things that they want announced. But I think that the action working group should address that question. We're growing really fast. This was going to begin as a book discussion group, and it's turned into something else that's growing really rapidly. So if you're interested in being part of that, please do stay. We will be meeting upstairs in the Pirates room, and Patty will be leading a visioning session down here, starting in about 5 minutes. Did I address the question in the way that you were?
Yeah, mine's more immediate. Partly, I wonder if I can put this on
Okay, one more thing, sorry. Who here who has Facebook? All right, raise your hand if you have Facebook. There is a Green New Deal discussion group and a Green New Deal discussion page. Please search that out and like it, and invite people, use your Facebook to invite people to these sessions.